you everybody for joining in today. My name is Mike Morgan. I'm the chair of the APA DC chapter. I'm just going to share my screen here very briefly. Just in case anybody is new to APA and this event, just want to give a little background. APA, we're a nonprofit trade organization for photographers, built and run by photographers. That's particularly in the DC chapter. We try to provide a community for the local photographic market, and but we also offer a whole bunch of events throughout the year. Some of them are business events. Some of them are, I'm sorry, we have business events. We have happy hours, all kinds of stuff. So hope you can join us for those. We have a couple of announcements I'd like to make really briefly here. We have our assistants and crew list that we've recently launched. That's on our website, apadc.com. And you can take a look at that. We've got lists of assistants, directors, retouchers, all sorts of crew, anybody that you might want to work with. We've got a few upcoming events. This week, Thursday, we've got happy hour at Ivy and Coney. So if you can join us for that. Then we've got a yoga workshop at the end of the month on the 25th. And then we've got another happy hour next month at the Roost. We've got a number of other events that we'll be announcing very soon. We've got a whole year full of things coming up. A few member benefits and discounts I want to share in case if you're an APA member. If you're not taking advantage of these, make sure that you always check on your member benefits. We get all kinds of great discounts and stuff as an APA member. If you're not an APA member, please consider joining. You can use this code DC1 for 20. That'll give you $20 off of any membership level. Okay. And all right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sam. And I want to just very briefly, I'm sure we all know Sam very well. He's been a local staple in our community for a very long time. Has also volunteered in the leadership of ASMP DC for several years, and we appreciate his leadership there, and we appreciate him being a member of APA and joining us today. All right, now, Sam, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot, Mike. Just want to make sure everyone can see my screen now, that I'm sharing the screen properly. And I assume I am. No one's telling me I'm not. So it's great being here with you all today. Special thanks to Mike and all the APA volunteers and chapter director Katie Dance for having such an active organization supporting the DC photo community. Nope, I didn't make this picture this week. This was from 2009, one of the early Snowmageddon storms. But here are a few pictures I made last week. I'm happy to take questions at the end of this presentation. If you like, you can put them in the chat as they come to mind, or raise your Zoom hand at the end. I'm also interested in any reaction you have to the images and also your general insights into photography. Feel free to add to the Zoom chat and provide any links if you like. Just so you know where I'm coming from, here's a little rundown of my work in photography. I've been in DC a long time. I started in photojournalism after college at a small community newspaper in the mountains of North Carolina. Moved to DC in 1987. Yes, I know that was a long time ago. And freelance assisted for photographers like Dennis Brock, Michael Evans, Bob McNeely, David Burnett, and did assignments for the Washington Post, New York Times, and other news and trade publications. I did a lot of magazine portraits in the 90s, working regularly for Washingtonian Magazine and others. I sought more corporate clients over time and morphed into an architectural photographer while documenting the construction of the museum on Pennsylvania Avenue between 2004 and 2008, which led me to my current architecture and people work under the umbrella of placemaking and urban development. I'm going to touch on all that today, as well as the book of pictures I made during the pandemic titled Faceless Faces in Public Places. But perhaps the most important thing to know about me is I had a poli-sci class with Michael Jordan. And yes, it was an important turning point in my life, but we'll just have to save that story for over a beer sometime. I'm here to share my journey in photography with you. It's my ever-evolving way of looking at the world and presenting my view of it. As photographer Joel Marwitz has noted, looking at the world may not change the world, but the world will certainly change you by looking at it. And I add, particularly by looking at it through photography. Rest assured, in my work, I have found there are potential surprises and subtle variations in the most familiar scenes. I've stumbled, hit brick walls, and missed a few shots for sure, but the quest to provide a deeper sense of place and time within the ever-changing boundaries of photography pushes me onwards. Fortunately, I enjoy how I make my living. I'm not saying it's easy, but I sure do like that making photographs gets me out to look at the world and helps me pay the bills. I know I'm lucky in that way. Little twists of fate have led me and saved me. So many things I could never plan. I've mostly been prepared to press the button when a great image was before me and jump at a new opportunity if it popped in my face. But as on the prowl for luck as I am, I take great direction from a Louis Pasteur quote that my photographer friend and mentor Steve, I just want to, yes, I'm still on here, that my photographer friend and mentor Steve Uzel often refers to. In the field of observation, chance favors the prepared mind. I try to be open to any wonderful thing happening before me, but I'm also on a quest to try to increase the odds of those wonderful moments and scenes appearing when I have a camera to my eye and my finger on the button. We all have a dream of being in paradise, right? I don't know exactly what paradise really looks like, but I can imagine it for myself. It changes over time, and it can be so elusive. But when I actually see a vision of it in front of me, I want to photograph it. In 1977, at 14 years old, my image of paradise looked like this: a passing scene in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, from the back window of my parents' station wagon. Some of you remember those cars and how the window on the rear gate rolled down, and kids like me staring out the back, usually making crazy faces and hand gestures at the cars behind. But somehow in this moment, I had a camera in my hand and snapped this photograph. I recall this picture being made after I helped my dear dad move one of my older sisters into college. I remember when I processed the film in a bathroom sink at home and how the negative jumped out at me. It had the glow of light from that beautiful afternoon beaming back at me. Nothing else on that roll looked so enchanting. It was my vision of paradise, sitting with a friend under a tree dappled in sweet light and cool shade. Ultimately, the picture was printed in our small local newspaper, the Daily Herald, that served the town of Weldon and the small area of eastern North Carolina I'm from. Now, that 1977 Chapel Hill photo is kind of grainy and just barely in focus. For sure it has the right feeling. I just want to show you that I have worked hard over the years to improve my technique, like this picture of paradise from Boulder, Colorado. But that 1977 photo of the couple sitting under the tree has stuck in my mind all these years, particularly when I think about why I make pictures. I make pictures to document, appreciate, celebrate, and interpret what I see and experience and share that with others. To have evidence to illustrate a point. to connect with an audience, to take on the challenge of creating compelling imagery, whether from familiar or unexpected places, and to record historic moments like this panorama made during the first inauguration of Barack Obama in 2009. I made this telephoto image from the same spot I shot the panorama from the press scaffolding adjacent to the Capitol. And no, I don't plan to photograph the next iteration of this ceremony this month. And on an even more personal level, I make photographs to literally suspend time and encapsulate precious moments with loved ones. I, like so many people, have seen places that are the opposite of paradise and felt compelled to capture and share those images so other people would know the troubles some folks and places are subjected to. Early in my career, several twists of fate led me to cover industrial pollution, including a trip with Greenpeace down the Mississippi River looking at toxic waste issues. At the time, I got turned on to the underreported story of environmental justice, in which poor people, particularly in rural areas, are subjected to a different type of chemical warfare because they live next to petrochemical factories and toxic waste dumps. Unfortunately, decades later, these kinds of polluted places are still all over the world. I documented the first Louisiana Toxics March in 1988. It was inspiring to see the local community join forces with national environmental groups to place their plea for clean air, land, and water in a civil rights context. Declan Hahn, who made important photographs during the civil rights era of the 1960s for the Charlotte Observer and Black Star Photo Agency, and later became a National Geographic photo editor, was a friend and mentor to me early in my career in DC. He taught me, in that Socratic-like manner he had, that photography is an important medium to help society address difficult issues, because great photojournalism brings such emotional immediacy to a subject. No doubt we live in an age of information and image overload. Whether we can really change the world with a picture is debatable, but issue-oriented photographers are on a mission to try. For about 5 years, I was deeply immersed in the subject and photographed communities affected by chemical spills and hazardous waste releases. During that time, I made numerous trips to New York to meet with photo editors of magazines. This was back in the day before the internet and social media. So the great photo editors of the time, as difficult as it could be to connect with them over the phone, were mostly open to meeting with young photographers to know who was out there shooting what. I was fortunate to meet with Lee Dudley, a longtime Life magazine photo editor. She told me in that meeting, it all has to be in one shot. By this time, the days of multi-page photo essays in magazines was already rare. She wanted to see images that were layered and told the story in one picture. That was my guiding drive and what I was looking for in this series. And that imperative has stuck with me in my work all these years. Images from this body of work were published widely, particularly around the 20th anniversary of Earth Day in 1990. Some of these photographs are now in the collection of the Library of Congress. It took a toll on me to witness these things, though nothing like what the people who lived in those places were going through. Eventually, I stepped away from covering this issue, but the journey of witnessing and making those images lives with me every day. I refocused my career and shot a ton of magazine portraits in the 1990s. You could say trading in one toxic nightmare for another. Okay, just kidding, seriously. But luckily, several magazine editors, many of whom I met showing my environmental work, encouraged my portrait photography by taking a chance on me with assignments. You can imagine many of these shoots were of DC political and media power people. These were crazy fast sessions, which always had the chance of falling apart at any moment. Honestly, I love the challenge of getting a compelling editorial portrait, hopefully without the person getting totally PO'd at me for shooting tons of pictures of them. I learned a lot doing that and gained a good bit of confidence getting in and out of lion's den after lion's den. I photographed Anthony Williams for People magazine shortly after he won his first election as mayor of DC. I learned from that assignment that the best time to photograph a politician is right after they win their first election, all happy and proud, but before they're sworn in and take on the burdens of office. I photographed Ruth Bader Ginsburg for the American Bar Association magazine. I think this was right up there with my being the most in awe of someone I was photographing in that moment. Generally, I played it pretty cool with the sort of power people I photographed. In this case, I got on my knees and suggested she think of me as her favorite little 5-year-old she ever met. It worked for about 10 seconds, just enough time to capture this look. This is then presidential nominee Barack Obama with the then current Democratic women senators. The photograph was made to be beamed on the Jumbotron at his nominating convention after the senators spoke to endorse him one by one. My magazine work helped open the door to photographing board of directors and staff portraits of corporate association and foundation clients, which I still do now. I was working, enjoying the challenge of getting the shots and keeping my business afloat, but something else was creeping up on me. I realized I didn't feel compelled to go shoot anything else besides work. I realized I was fighting that feeling, like every song had already been written and every photograph already taken. I needed a new twist of fate. One of my main clients for 12 years, starting right around the year 2000, was the museum. You may know it started as a smaller museum in Arlington, Virginia, dedicated to the history of news gathering and had a wonderful mission to promote the First Amendment. The folks that started the museum pulled an incredible real estate deal to build a new building on Pennsylvania Avenue, 6 blocks from the Capitol in 2004. Of course, it's a sad story that the museum closed. It was incredible to cover the construction of the building and be involved in their initial marketing imagery, and I really loved their First Amendment and freedom of the press mission. About midway through the 4-year construction job, they asked if I could shoot a panoramic photo of their incredible view of Pennsylvania Avenue from the 6th-floor terrace of the building. The picture was needed for an advertisement to entice tour bus operators to include the museum as a stop once it opened. Location and views were a key selling point for conference space renters as well. I took the assignment as an opportunity to research and learn about the then emerging technology of stitching digital images together to make panoramas. I knew a friend, not a professional photographer, but an engineer, had mastered the technology of stitching images together as a mere stepping stone in some of his programming work at the time. Think Google Earth. So I actually hired him as a consultant to help on that first panoramic shoot. And let me tell you, I was swimming over my head in digital technical stuff as we prepared for this, way over my head. This was in 2006, well before the making of panoramas was part of Photoshop and in iPhones. We had to use specialty software that was in development and being updated every 2 weeks, it seemed. But I had a sense that if I could somehow tame the technical hurdles and bring my experience and photographic sensibilities to this new image-making approach, that it could be very cool and rewarding. During that afternoon, we set up the tripod precariously on the edge of the still under construction terrace. We used special hardware to rotate the camera to capture segments of the view. I realized as we were turning the camera, yikes, we are going to pan right into the blaring sun. The view was looking south, so one would always pan into a bright area of the sky, except on a cloudy day, and a cloudy day photo wasn't going to work for the purpose at hand. As my head was literally spinning, my engineer friend said, "Oh, and there's this other thing called HDR photography where we can blend under and overexposed images together that can address this." I was like, "Dude, you are already killing me shooting this panorama as it is." I was clearly in way over my head. The bottom line is we pulled off that first panorama without HDR, and it was amazing to see the photos blend together into a seamless image later that night on the computer. The museum was happy enough with the picture. However, I mentioned to my client that I was learning new techniques and would want to try some different approaches to the shot in the future. Of course, now one could relatively easily replace the sky in Photoshop, but that technology wasn't as available at the time. But I came back with this image a few months later. I managed to blend HDR and panoramic stitching of the scene together and get more top and bottom by shooting the segments in a vertical orientation. I've been fortunate for clients to like my photographs over the years, but I never had a client like my photograph like the museum people did the day I rolled down a 5-foot long print of this picture. I walked away thinking, maybe I should shoot some more of these panos. The image was later printed on porcelain, an amazing printing technique that allows the panels to be outdoors in weather for upwards of 30 years, fade resistant, as a wayfinding display on the museum's terrace. That way, they didn't have to have staff there all day to tell people what buildings were in front of them. I sought out new locations along Pennsylvania Avenue that might afford great views. I'd literally walk into a building asking to see the property manager to get access to their terrace or roof to photograph from. The receptionist would generally think I was one of the T's, either a terrorist or a tourist. But I was lucky enough to connect with the building manager that totally got what I was trying to do. I had been to that building to cover events in years past and knew that its rooftop terrace had one of the best views of DC, where you can see from left to right the Capitol to the Washington Monument. I got access and photographed that view many, many times. It catapulted my experience in making panoramas. A set of those panoramas I made at various seasons of that amazing view now greets visitors to that terrace when they get off the elevators. The use of the images as decor reinforces the building's view before and after visitors go on the terrace. The images reinforce part of the building's brand. In the past, I would never want to photograph the monuments or Capitol Dome. Every picture had already been taken of them. But suddenly I could photograph the monuments and iconic places full of meaning and dear to people's hearts in this different manner. I was refining my approach, starting to see things differently, making pictures in a whole new way for me. I also started looking at old film panoramic photographs, many from the early history of photography, and took inspiration from them. I wanted to try photographing almost any place as a panorama. I certainly wasn't the only photographer making HDR panos, but I was mishmashing a number of techniques, breaking some rules, and coming up with my own digital recipes. For example, many were embracing 360-degree panoramas, but I was more drawn to making images that felt as if I was looking over my shoulders. 200 to 270 degrees seemed like the sweet spot for me. Ultimately, I realized what a trap that feeling of every picture has already been taken was to me, and how utterly false and defeating it is. With or without new technology, every day is a new day. Admittedly, sometimes it's easy to forget that. Working on those panoramas totally redirected my career into shooting more architectural and cityscape photography. I've gotten used to photographing from all kinds of rooftops and terraces, some crazy places for sure. And though I always have the correct permissions to be on the roof or terrace I'm shooting from, you can imagine I've had my fair share of Secret Service agents and police confront me over the years. They just sometimes don't get the memo that I'm supposed to be there shooting a picture. While I always appreciated architecture, I hadn't aspired to photograph it in a serious manner during my career during the film days. I wasn't drawn to the needed patience to master the 4x5 film format. But through serendipity, I became fascinated, obsessed, you might say, with the then emerging technology of blending exposures together, which was in its infancy at its time. Of course, now related technology has been in our iPhones for years. I got pretty crazy about it, and honestly, the technology reinvigorated my passion for photography and helped sustain my commercial photography career. I really wasn't a computer guy or very tech oriented, but I realized could make images like I never dreamed of being able to make before. When needed, it was like shooting with the widest angle lens ever. Combining my experience in photographing both people and the built environment has opened up the door to documenting the new urban renaissance, the placemaking, living, working, and new transit mobility that is occurring in DC and around the world. While I'm not making as many stitch panoramas now, they can be so dang complicated. I've made I make blended exposure images and definitely have returned to my roots by shooting a lot of single image photography of everyday scenes. Following is a quick sample of the range of my current work. Then I'll share with you my book project made during the pandemic, and lastly, a few final thoughts. Much of my current work is related to the amazing urban renaissance that DC and other cities are experiencing. I also photograph educational and civic buildings with and without people for architects, builders, and institutions, along with other commercial buildings. My people photography experience has come in handy while photographing activated spaces, blending people with architecture, which is how many firms and institutions like to portray and market their developments. This approach has worked well for photographing education and civic facilities too. I also photograph residential and commercial office buildings. Much of it is related to transit-oriented development and the creation of new places in urban areas. And now enter the pandemic in the early spring of 2020. Remember, in the early phase, so much was unknown about the virus. It was super scary when we were on that initial lockdown. I couldn't help but to want to get out and see what was going on. I didn't feel the need to try to photograph the severe medical crisis. The media was covering that very thoroughly. But as a photographer, I was curious and wanted to see what was going on out on the streets. I decided from the start to photograph with serious intention, but not with anything too preconceived, solely to just explore and see what our everyday world looked like during a pandemic. So I walked around with two Nikon DSLRs with wide and telephoto zooms attached, as opposed to approaching it more casually and lightly with my iPhone, which I do love to photograph with. I had no idea I was starting a series, much less that I would be compelled eventually to create a book of photographs. Immediately, I was drawn to the visually jarring nature of people wearing masks, not in some medical environment, but on Main Street, USA. There were certainly people around not wearing masks, but I didn't want to photograph them, only people with masks. At first, I went out in small spurts once or twice a week to photograph in my Tacoma Park neighborhood. Remember, we were in lockdown, and you had no idea how you really caught the disease. My wife Bobby was certainly worried about me and made sure I was outfitted with mask and sanitizer. I was also worried about me a bit too, but I had to see what was going on. Everyone was freaked out, and everything had this kind of horror movie feeling, like the aliens had landed and the air was poisoned. I fed out some of the images on my modest Instagram account. Since this was totally self-directed, I wanted to make the images black and white and mostly crop them square for impact on Instagram. Plus, I always loved the square format as I did a lot of I shot with Hasselblads back in the film days. I started making short trips to photograph in other parts of DC. I had never seen the streets so empty. It was very, very eerie. But something changed for me when I looked at this image from an early session at DuPont Circle as I downloaded it to my computer. I kind of sensed it when I was photographing, but viewing the image large on my computer screen, I immediately saw the bond the owner and his dog had. They still had that love and recognition, even with him wearing a mask. And then in the same session, this couple sitting on a bench. I realized that life still went on even during a pandemic, that wearing a mask to be responsible to your community during a public health crisis was not too much to ask, as much as a pain as it could be. And it didn't mean people couldn't carry on with their lives. People were continuing to live and love in their neighborhoods. And yet another couple, with a lady enjoying the sunny day reading a book on a park bench from that same session. Our bond with our neighborhoods became that much more apparent. With some nice encouragement from friends on Instagram, I started feeling like I had a series of images going and wanted to keep adding to that collection. My commercial work picked back up in late May 2020 since the construction trades were still building and finishing projects throughout the pandemic. That helped me get out to more neighborhoods where I could take a little extra time to work on my project. Around June, I thought I had the makings of a book. One of my friends is a cameraman for WJLA News here in the DC area, and from seeing the photos on my Instagram, he pitched the idea to his editors of following me around while I was photographing for the project for a day. He made the following report.
A local still photographer has spent many years taking photos of crowds in public places for his clients, but because of COVID-19, has changed his style of shooting. He started a project he calls Faceless Faces in public places, and he allowed our photojournalist, Brian Hopkins, to shadow him while on a shoot in Roslyn.
I'm just looking for a way to visually portray that there's something really wrong, that there's something amiss. Noma, Georgetown, DuPont Circle. I've hit all those neighborhoods at different times of day, different kinds of people walking about. Some of them just exercising, getting some fresh air. Other people still going to work, of course, essential workers out and about, and just seeing how life is still going on in the public sphere. Okay, so I see this fellow, he looks like a businessman. He's actually running down the street. A number of my clients are kind of realizing like, this is the new normal. We can't use the same pictures from last year with people walking in crowds and smiling at a big event or outdoor movie or something like that. We need to show people wearing masks in our neighborhood. 4 or 5 months ago, you could never imagine people wearing masks walking down Main Street, USA, or anywhere in Washington, D.C. Really, to me, that's compelling. And that's what I'm trying to capture.
I'm going to quickly flip through the first few pages of the book to give you a sense of how it all came together. I decided with the timely nature of it all that I would self-publish. Who knows if I could have even found an interested publisher and how long that would have taken. I kept photographing and working to hone in and define what I was doing, much of that by seeking advice from several close photographer friends. And that summer, I took a week-long online seminar about photo editing led by James Estrin of the New York Times that I happened to hear about. I mean, photographers, like many writers, are often their worst editors. That seminar gave me lots of food for thought and feedback at a great time, as I was still in the midst of shooting for the project, but also starting to think about how I would put it all together. I photographed from April through September 2020. Selecting and sequencing the images had to be the hardest part of it all. I sought input from several photo editors, including Mike Davis, formerly of National Geographic. I sifted through a lot of advice and pulled out the nuggets that spoke to me to make the book I wanted, which was a series of photographs, no major text except an afterword. And that little bit of writing was really hard too, but luckily I have good friends who are literary editors who helped me with the structure of the book and the text. And most importantly, I'm fortunate that my wife Bobby is an accomplished graphic designer who did the book layout. The book was initially printed in October 2020 with blurb printers. While I would never have wished this pandemic to happen, the journey of making the book, while challenging, was a thrill, and I really loved the process. It gave me a chance to really think about photographs, photography, and most importantly, collaborate with people I truly respect, yet remotely, during that era of intense social isolation. As I said, I love making the book and was thrilled the project received some good media mentions, featured in a few group exhibits, and recognized in the photography annuals produced by Graphis and American Photography. Also, my clients appreciated it as a gift touchstone for that remarkable, unprecedented time. If you like, you can scan the QR code with your cell camera or use a link to get more information about the project. Also, please use the discount code CAMERA15 for a discount if you would like to purchase one, including the digital ebook. In the aftermath of the pandemic, it's become very important for my clients to present activated places, showing that people are coming out of their homes into neighborhoods and facilities again. This was some of the most joyous public dancing I ever witnessed at an early outdoor concert near the Navy Yard as the vaccine came along with the spring weather in 2021. Thankfully, our urban areas are trending towards a more lively scene, showing that people are once again moving through commercial corridors via the impact of still photography has been an important way my clients are encouraging even more activity, be their audience, customers, investors, or community members at large. Please visit my website and Instagram to see where my current work is now. I want to leave you with a few last thoughts that help me get through those inevitable tough times when, as a freelance photographer, you might feel like pictures aren't really that important, that no one is going to hire you, and that there's not a need for professional photographers in this everybody has a cell phone camera world we live in. But when a really successful marketing person says, photographs represent the soul of your client's company, publication, or institution, you know pictures are really important. And that much more when a successful business executive says, the firms with the best pictures win. That one always compels me forward and gets me back on the rebound. So I wish you all well, whether you're a photographer, a lover of photography, a client of photographers, or just someone seeking those paradise moments. Thanks for spending this time with me. Have a great rest of the day, and I'm happy to try to take any questions if you have them. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. That was fantastic. And yeah, we'd be happy to take some questions. I don't know if people want to raise their hands. You can use the React tool down at the bottom to do so. If we've got any questions? Truly appreciate it. Well,
Yeah.
Sam, I do have oh, well, see, we do have a question here. It says, were the outdoor areas for clients staged with models like the one with the couple on the grass?
No, those are all kind of real people doing real things. Occasionally I have clients, particularly more for like set up scheduled architectural shoots where they might bring in models or usually more so like people that work for their companies or something like that. And but usually I'm just capturing really kind of what's going on in those places. So those are real people there.
Excellent. And then Rob wanted to know if you've ever used the Linhof 612, 617, or the Noblex or any of those panoramic
No, I never really
cameras.
used the film panoramic cameras back in the film days. I mean, I have friends who had wide lux, and I've always like drooled over it. Like I thought those were the coolest things. But no, I really didn't start shooting panoramas till I started this digital thing.
Excellent. And I was curious, with the how successful it was for you to put together this book with the pandemic, and what a great exercise that was. Are you doing more books? Are you planning additional ones? Do you have any projects in mind?
I mean, I'd like to. I mean, I'd love to one day maybe do a book of my panoramas, kind of sort of in hindsight to wrap that up. But right now I'm really busy just trying to work, like doing client work and which I'm really happy with, and I feel very fortunate. I really love this kind of urban development and placemaking and architecture world that I kind of stumbled, as you saw, kind of stumbled into after having that whole photojournalism and people photography experience. So the combination, I really get to do all these things now that my experience, brings to the table. So we'll see down the line, maybe some books, but right now, if you got any photo assignments, feel free to get in touch. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's good. Things are good.
Let's see, there's another question from the chat here. Anne was asking, do you ever worry about photo releases for photographing public spaces?
I mean, a little bit for sure. Definitely, if I'm out there and someone, I can actually have communication with the people and or comes up to me and says, please don't photograph me. I'm going to respect that. But there's a lot of gray area in terms of when photo releases are needed or not. First of all, you certainly can photograph anyone in a public space. However, it's how that picture is used where some of those questions come up about model releases. And certainly I'm no lawyer, so, but just my understanding is that you can utilize photographs for kind of news gathering and educational purposes and artistic purposes and things like that of people in the public. So that's where a lot of my work goes. Now, there might be some gray areas. The media landscape's changed so much. Where are people really getting their news now? It's not necessarily like traditional newspapers and media that like I grew up with and that have been around most of my adult life. But people are getting news from organizations, right? Like what is happening in your community. So the bottom line, though, as a photographer, is that in all my contracts with my clients, there's a clause in there that in the blue moon scenario, it has never happened. I'm knocking on wood in my many years of photographing. In the blue moon scenario, if someone should bring forth a claim based upon that client publishing that image, then I'm indemnified against that. Kind of just like if someone on their staff photographed something and it was published, like I would think they would try to defend their staff person. So that's a very important clause to me. I don't give up on that one. Like that is a line for sure. And clients understand that and people sign that, like every assignment I do pretty much that's signed. And we've never had any problems. So but I think, it's incumbent on the client to make sure they don't put a derogatory caption under that picture or open up some can of worms like that. But yeah, that's how we handle it.
Excellent. Right, and we've got a question from APA's other Sam, Sam Levitan. For the activated spaces, for your architecture work, are you working with the people that happen to be in those spaces and organically capturing the movements that they're making, or are those people cast and directed to walk in certain ways?
They're not cast, but sometimes it's a combination, like if I am there working for and with a client and they have some staff there, or sometimes the assistants, wonderful assistants I work with, we have them walk through the space to activate an area of the composition, right? But let's say, for instance, if I'm in a lobby, like a building lobby, and I have that assistant or person walk through the space, but then someone else just happens to walk through the door and they do something, what I love about it really organically, like I probably wouldn't have thought to have someone walk that way, but that makes a lot of sense, right? I capture that. And then maybe I'm blurring that picture even more in the post-production or whatever, just to try to take out any kind of like recognition of the person or kind of respect their privacy. And so it's a combination. But in most places, like particularly outdoor public spaces, I am just photographing the people that are there.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. I don't, do we have any final questions before we thank Sam? Okay, right. Well, Sam, thank you very much. We truly appreciate you presenting to us and sharing with us and yeah, and for being such an active member of our community with both through ASMP and through APA. We appreciate you so much.
My pleasure. No, I appreciate you guys too.